What would your younger self say about how your family turned out?
Every year, like clockwork, on the morning of January 1st, I wake up, still groggy, still half hungover from cheap champagne and half-hearted toasts, and open my phone to see the same goddamn post from my cousins, the sparkling, too perfect family photo. Coordinated outfits, soft lighting, and always, without fail, some version of a caption like, "Ringing in another year with my day ones," or "Cousins are your first best friends." And every single year, despite being there, despite dragging myself through the cold, across state lines, with a bottle of Prosecco and a store-bought pie, I am either fully cropped out of the shot or reduced to some grainy elbow at the edge of the frame like a ghost who accidentally wandered into their perfect little portrait. The first time it happened, I thought it was a mistake. I remember looking at the photo, smiling at first, then tilting my head, trying to find myself in the background, thinking, weird. Maybe they picked the wrong one. I mean, I was there. I remember being behind the couch when they took it, holding my drink in one hand and trying to get out of the way because someone yelled that I was blocking the dog. But the second year it happened, when the same picture went up with everyone grinning in front of the fireplace and not a single trace of me in the frame, I started to get that familiar throb in the back of my head. The one that comes when you realize something isn't just a fluke. It's a pattern. It's a message. I tried not to let it get to me. I really did. I'd tell myself they probably just wanted a tight shot of the core crew, or maybe the angle was better, or maybe I wasn't looking my best that night anyway. I'd scroll past, double tap out of habit, and go back to whatever sad little breakfast I'd made for myself. But by the fifth year, the excuses dried up. Because by the fifth year, they started adding that one phrase that really sent the message home, the whole gang. And I was not in the gang. Not really. Not to them. Now, to really understand how deep this goes, you'd have to know the kind of family I come from. We're not estranged. We don't scream or throw punches at Thanksgiving. We don't have the kind of drama you see in movies with drunk uncles flipping tables. No, our dysfunction is quieter, more polite, and far more cruel. We're the kind of family that weaponizes politeness, that maintains the illusion of closeness through forced smiles and gift cards. The cousins Taylor, Olivia, Marcy, and Jess grew up together like a little country club inside the larger family. Matching sweaters on Christmas. Coordinated vacation pictures from their summers in Martha's Vineyard. Even now, well into their 30s, they still move as a unit, text chains, joint social media accounts, annual ski trips with their matching Patagonia jackets, and carefully curated group shots. And me? I was always the odd one out. I didn't go to Yale or Tufts like the rest of them. I went to a state school I barely finished, worked 3 jobs, and started a skincare line from scratch in my apartment while eating cereal for dinner. My family talks about me like I'm a free spirit, which is just their code for not one of us. But I always showed up. I brought gifts. I offered to help. I made jokes. I let them call me quirky, weird, creative. I let them make fun of the fact that I was still single at 37, that I drove a 10-year-old car, that I didn't have a real job. I let it slide because deep down, some part of me thought if I just kept showing up, eventually they'd let me in. Eventually, they'd see me, not the mess they thought I was, not the embarrassment they tried to hide behind the cropped photos, but me, as a real part of the family. But every time I saw that picture, every year, I realized that hope was just another thing I was carrying alone. Last year's post, though, that one hit different. Because I wasn't just cropped, I was completely erased. I had brought a bottle of Moat, real stuff, not the usual discount bubbly. I'd dressed up. I had even gotten my makeup done that morning because I knew someone would be taking photos. I remember walking into Aunt Diane's living room, all decked out with gold streamers and a $30 cheese board from Whole Foods, and thinking, maybe this year they'll treat me like I belong. I remember Taylor's wife asking if I could take a group photo. Just one quick shot for the post, she said. So I took it. I lined them up, made them laugh, told them where to stand, adjusted the lighting, and then, after I'd handed the phone back, Olivia said, "Get in here." So I did. I squeezed into the corner. They took another photo. Smiles all around. It felt nice. For about 12 hours. And then, Morning comes. January 1st. I open Instagram. There it is. Perfect picture. Same living room. Same outfits. I scroll. I zoom in. And I see it. That was the first photo. The one before they told me to get in. The one I took of them. That's the one they posted. And the caption? The whole gang. Nothing but love. I stared at it for a long time. Not angry. Not sad. Just blank. Like something inside me had gone still. Like I had finally gotten the message loud and clear. So I didn't text them. I didn't like the post. I didn't respond to Marcy's Happy New Year text that felt like it was sent to the whole contact list. I just closed the app and sat there. For a long time. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my business dashboard. I looked at my numbers. I looked at my Q4 earnings. I looked at the budget I had set aside for advertising. And that's when it hit me. If they were going to crop me out of their frame, then I'd buy my own damn spotlight. That was the moment the idea was born, not out of rage, not even out of bitterness, but out of a cold, sharp clarity I hadn't felt in years. It was like watching the pieces finally click into place. I didn't need to ask for a seat at their table anymore. I could build my own table. And while I was at it, I could make damn sure they'd see it. Because this year, I wasn't going to wait for their approval. I wasn't going to smile politely while they erased me. This year, I bought space. Literal space. I paid for it. And I used it. And oh, they saw it. Every single one of them. But we'll get to that. First, let me tell you how the podcast came into the picture. The idea didn't come to me in some grand epiphany with orchestral music and fireworks going off in the background, but rather in the quiet, petty kind of silence that sits in your stomach the morning after a disappointment you should have seen coming from a mile away. It was January 2nd. The house was still a mess from the little get-together I'd hosted for friends who weren't exactly family, but didn't require me to prove my worth with wine or wit to stay invited, and I was sitting on my worn-down sectional, still in pajamas, eating cold leftovers straight from the container, when I heard their voices again, those perfect cousins of mine, laughing together on a podcast I didn't even like but knew they all worshipped like it was gospel. They'd been talking about this podcast for months, tagging each other in episodes, reposting snippets, quoting the host in captions as if her words were some kind of sacred scripture, and I had always just scrolled past their enthusiasm with mild irritation. Not because I had any personal problem with the show itself, but because every single thing they adored felt like a shared password into a world I was never allowed to enter. That morning, though, as I sat there nursing my third coffee and listening to Olivia giggle about how our New Year's pic went viral again, kind of, something inside me snapped, not loudly, not violently, but in a sharp, focused click. Like the loading of a spring I'd been winding for years without realizing it. I opened my laptop, typed the name of the podcast into the search bar, and within minutes I was scrolling through the contact page, reading about advertising options, sponsorship tiers, and the kind of brand synergy they were looking for. Most of it was the usual influencer jargon I'd grown used to navigating as a small business owner with a modest but loyal customer base, and honestly, my skincare line wasn't anywhere near the level of flashy wellness brands they usually promoted. But I wasn't interested in synergy. I wasn't interested in conversion rates or audience demographics or affiliate links. What I wanted was a moment, one single moment, where my voice, or at least the echo of it, would cut through the curated noise my family had wrapped themselves in like bubble wrap. The rates weren't cheap, but they weren't impossible either. I had been putting away a small reserve for months, money I had intended to use on a regional campaign that would maybe pull in some extra holiday sales, but suddenly this felt more urgent, more personal, more real. It wasn't just about exposure, it was about presence. About planting a flag right in the middle of the space they thought was exclusively theirs and saying, I'm here too. I always have been. The application asked for my business name, product focus, mission statement, and, of course, what I wanted the host to read aloud in my sponsored spot. I sat with that last field for a long time, fingers hovering above the keyboard, knowing this wasn't just an ad, it was my chance to make a statement. Not just to the podcast's listeners, but to 4 people I had spent a lifetime trying to impress without ever admitting how badly I wanted to. And so I wrote it. Not out of bitterness, but with precision, with humor, and, yes, with a little bit of vengeance disguised as charm. Shout out to the black sheep who bought this spot with her own damn company. Here's to the ones they crop out of family photos, but keep showing up anyway. I read it over and over again, tweaking commas, making sure it sounded like something their favorite host would say without hesitation, and once I hit send, I sat back and just stared at the screen, wondering what the hell I had just done and whether it was brave or pathetic or maybe both. The confirmation came through the next morning. My ad was approved, scheduled for the New Year's Eve episode, the one they were all sure to be listening to as they got dressed for their glittery little party, sipping cocktails and clinking glasses over jokes I'd never be part of. The days leading up to December 31st dragged on with a kind of nervous electricity I hadn't felt since I first launched my product line 3 years earlier with a homemade logo and a dozen jars in a cardboard box. I went through my normal routine, packing orders, answering customer emails, doing inventory checks, but underneath every task was that pulsing current of anticipation, knowing that somewhere, somehow, I was about to reclaim something that had been slowly chipped away from me over the years without anyone noticing. I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends, not my assistant, not even my therapist, because I wanted the moment to be mine, untouched, unsupervised, unsweetened by outside perspective. On the morning of the 31st, I kept checking my phone like a lunatic, waiting for the episode to drop, and when it finally did, mid-afternoon, with their signature quirky intro music and the host's too-perfect voice welcoming everyone to the last vibe check of the year, I hit play with my headphones in and held my breath. The usual banter rolled on, stories about awkward holiday run-ins, resolutions nobody would keep, and then, right around the 20-minute mark, came the transition. And now, a quick shout-out from one of our listeners. This one made me smile, she said, her tone bright, breezy, totally unaware of the landmine she was about to step on. This one goes out to all the black sheep out there. Shout out to the black sheep who bought this spot with her own damn company. Here's to the ones they crop out of family photos, but keep showing up anyway. She laughed a little. Honestly, relatable. It was less than 15 seconds. 15 seconds of audio broadcast to their favorite podcast, the one they never missed, the one they quoted like scripture. But I sat there on my bed, alone in my apartment, grinning like a madwoman. Because for once, just once, it was my voice they were hearing, even if they didn't know it yet. The next part? That's where things got real. Because I thought I'd feel satisfied, even triumphant. But I wasn't ready for what came after. The silence. The slow burn. And then, the explosion. The thing about revenge, even the classy, creative, non-violent kind that involves 15 seconds of sponsored airtime on a lifestyle podcast, is that it never quite hits the way you expect it to. Because while you're sitting there rehearsing their reactions in your head, imagining the way their faces will freeze mid-laugh, the way the wine glass might pause halfway to their lips, the way silence will settle over the room like a heavy wool blanket, you forget that real people don't always behave the way you've scripted them in your fantasy, and when those real people are your cousins, the ones who've spent decades sharpening their passive-aggressive arsenal to Olympic-level precision, what you get instead is not confrontation, not remorse, not even acknowledgement, but something much colder and far more infuriating, calculated indifference wrapped in a flimsy veil of hurt feelings. It started the morning after New Year's Eve, when I woke up to find not a barrage of furious texts as I had secretly hoped, not even a single direct call or voice message, but instead a flurry of vague, perfectly crafted Instagram stories from Marcy and Olivia, clips of them in their matching satin pajamas, holding coffee mugs and mouthing along to some trending audio about cutting off toxic energy in 2025, followed by a boomerang of them clinking glasses with the words only good vibes allowed in this circle, typed across in loopy white script, which would have been easy to scroll past if not for the fact that it was so obviously, so painfully, aimed directly at me, a digital middle finger wrapped in millennial pink. I stared at my phone for a while, thumb hovering over their names, debating whether to engage, whether to call it out, whether to do what I used to do, which was retreat, apologize without being asked, smooth the tension I didn't even create, but something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe it was the first flicker of understanding that no amount of good behavior was ever going to earn me a seat at their curated table, not because I wasn't good enough, but because they had already decided what role I was meant to play, and black sheep doesn't get an invitation, it gets a label and then gets locked out. By noon, the group chat had come alive. Not the family one, because that one had been silent for days, as usual, but the cousins-only thread. The one I had been grandfathered into years ago, but where I rarely spoke unless someone asked me to Venmo for a birthday present or coordinate a group gift. The first message came from Taylor, who, true to form, kept it light, breezy, detached. So, that ad was something, huh? No punctuation, no context, just a nudge to let me know they had heard it, processed it, and were now ready to start the theater of polite outrage. Jess followed, with one of her classic spiritual disguised as condescending replies. Wow. I guess some people process things publicly instead of having a real conversation. That's new. Olivia chimed in minutes later. It was a cheap shot. Honestly, I thought we were past that high school vibe. And then silence. I read each message slowly, letting the words settle, feeling that old familiar itch under my skin, the one that used to make me jump in and explain myself, the one that told me I had to fix the mood or risk being frozen out even more than usual. But this time, instead of typing back immediately, I closed the chat, made myself a strong cup of coffee, and let the discomfort hang in the air like cigarette smoke. When I did finally respond, it wasn't a defense, and it wasn't an apology. It was just this: I'm glad you all heard it. It was meant to be heard. They didn't reply. But later that night, Taylor texted me directly, not in the group, but privately, as he often did when he wanted to play both sides, to keep his reputation as the chill cousin who didn't pick favorites, but still stayed in the loop. He said he thought the ad was kind of baller, that it was honestly clever, and that maybe, just maybe, it meant I was finally leaning into the game. I asked him what that meant, and he said something I haven't been able to forget since. It means you're finally using the system instead of whining about it. You're playing it smart. That's how you get in. That's how you get in. Like this was a club. Like there were rules I had failed to understand. Like all these years, while I was trying to earn love through presence, loyalty, and effort, they were earning status through manipulation, strategy, and exclusion, smiling while they shut the door behind them and told me to try harder. His tone was so casual, so amused, as if this whole thing was one long, elaborate joke that I was just now beginning to understand. I didn't laugh. I didn't even respond. I stared at his message for a while and realized something that made my stomach turn. He thought this was a move to get closer to them, a power play for recognition, not what it really was, a final statement of separation. Because I didn't do this to be let in. I didn't spend a chunk of my fourth quarter earnings on a podcast ad so I could finally be invited to the cousins' wine tasting weekends or included in their New Year's caption. I did it to say, loud and clear, that I was done asking, done begging, done bending. But the fact that he thought this was an olive branch, that he could laugh and tell me I was getting it now, made me realize they would never really see me. Not as I am. Only as the version they could joke about, tolerate, maybe admire in secret if I got successful enough, but never truly respect in the way that matters. And yet, the fallout wasn't just theirs. The podcast ad didn't just echo in that group chat. It traveled. It found its way to inboxes, DMs, and comments from strangers, women, mostly, who messaged my business account and even my personal one, saying things like, "This made me cry in my car, and I've been the cropped cousin my whole life." I got orders from zip codes I'd never shipped to, people tagging my products in their stories with captions like, "For the black sheep in all of us." The company surged, the analytics jumped, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something other than invisible. I felt seen, not by them, but by people who understood something deeper. Still, the silence from my family roared louder than any praise. Aunt Diane didn't call. My mother asked me if I could please just let it go, like I had knocked over a vase instead of lighting a match in a room soaked with gasoline. And through it all, I kept thinking about that phrase, "That's how you get in." But I wasn't trying to get in anymore. I was trying to get free. I thought that would feel like victory. But instead, it felt like standing in the aftermath of a storm you called down yourself, still alive, still upright, but unsure whether the damage was worth it. And then, just when I thought the noise had died down, something happened that shifted everything. Not a text. Not a call. A photo. Posted quietly. Without tags. Just 4 of them. Laughing on a balcony. Captioned, "Some things never change." They weren't just cropping me out anymore. They were erasing me entirely. And that, oddly enough, didn't break me. It did the opposite. It sharpened me. There's a kind of clarity that only comes after you've finally stopped trying to be included, a clarity that doesn't arrive with trumpets or relief, but sneaks up quietly while you're folding laundry or sitting in traffic or, in my case, reordering packaging labels for the 4th time in 2 weeks because the new supplier kept getting the margins wrong, and suddenly it hits you, not the pain, not the betrayal, not even the bitterness, but the simple, clean truth that they were never going to see you as anything other than the outlier, and the more you tried to shrink yourself to fit their frame, the more invisible you became. I had spent so many years analyzing their behavior like it was a code I could crack if I just paid close enough attention, trying to figure out why they kept cropping me out of the frame, metaphorically and literally, wondering if it was something I said. Something I didn't say, something I wore, some fundamental flaw I carried like a stain they couldn't Photoshop, but the truth, once I stopped running in circles, was more devastating in its simplicity. They didn't exclude me because I was flawed. They excluded me because they needed someone to exclude, because their image, their perfectly polished brand of togetherness, relied on someone being just different enough to leave out. And I had unknowingly volunteered for the role by simply refusing to become a carbon copy of their curated lives. That realization didn't land all at once, but came in fragments, small, sharp memories that resurfaced like splinters breaking through skin years after the wound was supposed to be healed. I remembered the Halloween when I was 11 and had begged my mother to help me make a costume from scratch, this elaborate jellyfish with tentacles made out of bubble wrap and glow sticks, only to show up at our cousin's house and be greeted by the others in identical store-bought princess dresses, their mothers cooing over how adorable they looked while barely glancing in my direction. I remembered the birthday party in high school where my name had been left off the cake, not maliciously, they'd said, just a mistake, though somehow the matching monogrammed party favors for the others hadn't been. I remembered my college essay idea being casually shared during a family dinner by Taylor, who said he was inspired by something I'd said, and then watching him get into the school I'd been waitlisted from without so much as a thank you. These weren't isolated incidents. They were a pattern. A slow erosion of recognition. A death by 1,000 tiny omissions. So when that photo appeared, just days after the podcast ad aired, a new post from Olivia's account showing the 4 of them on a rooftop somewhere expensive-looking, all glowing skin and winter coats and laughing faces, captioned, "Some things never change." Something in me that had always curled inward out of habit began, for the first time, to stretch outward, not out of a need to be seen by them, but out of a deep and sudden hunger to be seen without them, to carve a space that didn't require their permission or approval or even their acknowledgement. And so, for the first time in years, I turned the camera on myself, literally and metaphorically. I didn't wait for the perfect moment, didn't hire a photographer or curate a setting. I went outside just before midnight on January 5th, stood in front of my apartment under the yellow glow of a street lamp, still wearing the blazer I'd thrown on earlier for a meeting, and snapped a photo. Nothing glamorous. No filters. Just me, holding a champagne bottle in one hand, my expression somewhere between amused and exhausted. I posted it with a caption that said, "Here's to the ones they don't post." Still showed up. Still built something. Still smiling. There was no big explosion. No viral wave. But the comments trickled in, friends, customers, even a few distant acquaintances who had clearly been watching from the sidelines all along, saying things like, this hit home, and needed this today, and been there. Still there. It didn't feel like a parade, but it did feel like solidarity, like I had stopped waiting to be invited and started building something sturdier than inclusion, self-recognition. Then came the email. Not from the podcast producer I'd worked with, but from the host herself. The voice I had heard so many times coming through my earbuds while I packed orders or scrubbed my kitchen sink. The voice I had paid to speak the words I had written. And it wasn't a thank you or a confirmation or even a pitch. It was an invitation. She wrote that the ad had stuck with her, that she'd received messages about it, that people were asking where it came from, who wrote it, and more importantly, why. She wanted to know if I'd be open to coming on the show, not as a sponsor, but as a guest. That email sat in my inbox for nearly 2 days before I responded, not because I was unsure, God, no, but because I needed to feel what it meant to be asked for once, to be seen not as a charity case or an outsider trying to sneak through the door, but as someone with a story worth telling. When I finally said yes, I didn't rehearse my answers or map out a strategy. I didn't call anyone to share the news, didn't post about it ahead of time, didn't even bring it up in the few social conversations I had that week. I wanted it to be quiet. I wanted it to be mine. And when the day of the recording arrived, I logged in early, headphones on, heart steady, and when she asked me what made me write that ad, what made me say it like that, I told her the truth, plain and without decoration. I was tired of waiting to be included. I was tired of showing up, only to be erased. So I stopped asking. And I started talking. We talked for nearly an hour about family, about identity, about growing up as the one who never quite fit into the boxes other people tried to hand you. She didn't interrupt. She didn't flatten my words with platitudes. She let it breathe. And when the episode aired, a few days later, I sat on my couch and listened to myself speak in a way I hadn't heard before, not with desperation or defensiveness, but with calm clarity. The feedback was overwhelming, not in volume, but in depth. Messages poured in from people across the country, strangers, sharing their own stories of being left out, shut down, overlooked, edited out of photos, memories, entire families. And while none of it fixed what had been lost over the years, it created something else entirely, something quieter, but sturdier. Connection. But the final word didn't come from them. It came from me. And as I was about to find out, the story wasn't over. Not yet. The irony, of course, is that after years of chasing their validation like some kind of emotional marathon with no finish line, the moment I finally stopped running, truly, fully stopped, the world around me didn't collapse the way I'd always feared it would. In fact, something far stranger happened. It expanded, quietly at first, then with increasing boldness, like a lens pulling back to reveal that the space I'd been trapped in all these years wasn't the only room in the house, and beyond the echo chamber of those 4 curated cousins and their sparkling social media symmetry, there existed an entire universe filled with people who didn't care about matching outfits or Ivy League resumes or whether your smile was symmetrical enough for a group shot. And suddenly, that realization wasn't just liberating, it was grounding, almost frightening in its simplicity. After the podcast aired and the emails started flooding in dozens, then hundreds, many of them long, vulnerable, raw messages from strangers who had heard my story and seen themselves in it, I found myself sitting in my studio at 2 a.m, surrounded by product boxes and shipping labels and jars of cream I'd formulated myself on nights just like this, and I began to read those messages out loud, one by one, not to share them, not to repost them for sympathy or praise, but because I needed to hear those words in the air, to believe that what I had said, what I had carried for so long in silence, had somehow made space for someone else to breathe, to feel seen, even just for a moment. Some wrote about being the only divorced sibling in a family of picture-perfect marriages, others about being childless in circles obsessed with baby photos and school plays, and many, too many, described being quietly edited out of family albums, group chats, holiday cards, not with cruelty, not even with open hostility, but with that same casual, unspoken indifference that hurts more than hatred ever could, because it tells you that your presence is not offensive or threatening, it's simply Unnecessary. And yet, in the middle of all that, between the affirmations from strangers and the silence from my own bloodline, I felt something creeping in that I hadn't prepared for, something I wasn't even sure I wanted to face. The question of whether I had done the right thing. Not because I regretted it, not exactly, but because the deeper truth is that revenge, even the cleanest, cleverest kind, rarely arrives without a cost, and as much as I had convinced myself that I didn't care about their opinions anymore, I couldn't lie to myself completely. There was a piece of me, small but real, that still wanted someone in that circle to stop pretending, to drop the performance, to look me in the eye and say, "You were right." But no one did. There was no apology, no reckoning, not even a late-night message from Taylor, who had once been the closest thing I had to an ally among them, and whose silence now felt like its own kind of betrayal. Instead, there was only distance, measured not just in geography, but in the widening gap of interpretation, where my attempt to claim space was read not as strength, but as spite, and where their refusal to acknowledge the harm they caused was, to them, simply maintaining peace. So, I did what I always do when things get too quiet. I created. I poured myself into work, not as a distraction, but as an offering, a reminder that while they were busy pretending I didn't exist, I was still building, still crafting, still reaching people who saw value not in my silence, but in my story. I redesigned the packaging, launched a limited edition called the Unposted Collection, a name that made me laugh every time I printed the labels, and wrote a short note to include with each order, a message that read, "Here's to the ones who show up, even when no one's watching, especially then." And then, almost as if the universe had one last card to play, an unexpected message landed in my inbox, not from a cousin, not from a critic, but from a small business magazine asking if I'd be willing to share more about my story. Not just the ad or the fallout, but the business itself, the journey, the mission, the grit behind the glamorous photos. They didn't want a fluff piece. They wanted the truth. And for once, I had it. That article led to more coverage. That coverage led to new partnerships. And one day, in the middle of a video interview, someone off camera asked me, "What would you say to your family now if they were listening?" I paused. Not for effect, but because I realized in that moment that the answer had changed. A year ago, I would have delivered some sharp, clever line about being cropped out, about resilience, about proving them wrong. 6 months ago, I might have said nothing at all, just raised my eyebrows and let the silence speak. But now? Now, I just said this. I'd say thank you. Because the emptiness they left gave me the space to fill with something real. Not recognition. Not revenge. But something mine. That was the truth. But if I'm being honest, the final punctuation on this whole story didn't come from a podcast or a feature or a social media trend. It came quietly, on the next New Year's Eve, when I hosted my own gathering, small but real, filled with friends who knew the full, unfiltered version of me, the one who didn't need to perform or apologize, and just before midnight, while others were setting up fireworks and pouring champagne, I slipped into the kitchen, opened my phone, and checked Instagram. Not out of habit, but out of curiosity. And there it was. Their post. The cousins. Same pose. Same lighting. Same caption. Forever the core four. I looked at it for a second, no sadness, no anger, just a brief flicker of something like relief, and then I did something I never thought I'd do. I closed the app without screenshotting it, without overanalyzing it, without imagining what my elbow might have looked like had I still been in the frame. Then I walked back outside, raised my glass to the sky, and clicked post on my own story. It was a short video. Just me, standing under string lights, surrounded by people who saw me, not because I bought my way into their feed, not because I made noise, but because I showed up and stayed. The caption? Shout out to the black sheep. We're not in the frame. We're running the damn show. And for once, I didn't wait to see who watched it. Because this time, the only person I needed to see it already had.